Imagine ruining a billionaire's night in 5 seconds flat. I didn't just spill wine, I launched a vintage Chateau Petrus directly onto the chest of the most terrifyingly handsome man in Seattle. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. The stain was a crimson disaster on pristine white silk. I expected him to yell. I expected a lawsuit. I didn't expect him to step into my personal space, his eyes burning with a dark primal hunger, and slowly drag his tongue up the fabric to taste the mess I made. The air didn't just crackle, it ignited. My heart stopped, and then he whispered the words that sealed my fate. "Now you owe me a shirt." Trust me, the price tag was way more than I could afford. Welcome back to the pack, and a massive howl of hello to all our new listeners. You are tuning in to Atlena's Romantasy Collection, your home for the steamiest werewolf romance and dark fantasy audiobooks. If you are ready to find out how Roxy pays off this debt, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a spicy chapter. I want to see how far our pack reaches today. Drop a comment down below and tell me where in the world you are listening from. Now, let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Crash. The service entrance of the Castellan estate looked less like a delivery bay and more like the entrance to a museum for people who hated dust. Roxy Miller wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of grease in its wake. "Come on, you absolute walnut," she grunted, kicking the side door of her bright orange 2012 Ford Transit van, affectionately known as the Pumpkin. The door stuck, as it always did when she was in a hurry. With a practiced kick-jiggle maneuver, she wrenched it open, revealing 4 stainless steel kegs of her signature Nutbuster Stout. "Stay here, Meatball," she told the massive Harlequin Great Dane drooling on the passenger seat. "If you eat the upholstery again, I'm selling you to a circus." Meatball offered a low, mournful woof and rested his chin on the dashboard. Roxy hauled the first keg onto the hand truck. She was 20 minutes late. The charity masquerade gala inside was already in full swing, and apparently, the wealthy elite of Seattle couldn't survive another hour without craft beer. She smoothed her flannel shirt, which was hopelessly wrinkled, and checked her reflection in the side mirror. Wild auburn hair escaping a pencil-held bun, hazel eyes wide with stress, and cargo pants stained with hop oil. She looked like she'd wrestled a tractor and lost. "Just drop the beer, get the check, leave," she muttered, wheeling the heavy load toward the service door. Except, the service door was locked. Panic flared. She tried the handle again. Nothing. The only other option was a set of tall glass double doors 20 feet to the left. They looked important. They looked forbidden. "I am not hauling this keg back to the van," she decided. She pushed the glass doors open and wheeled the hand truck through. Immediately, the air changed. It went from humid Seattle drizzle to climate-controlled, expensive, lavender-scented perfection. She wasn't in a hallway, she was in the main atrium. It was a sea of silk, diamonds, and masks. A string quartet played something that sounded like it cost more than her rent. Roxy froze, gripping the handles of the hand truck. She was a stain on a pristine canvas. "Excuse me," a waiter hissed, appearing out of nowhere with a tray of crystal glasses filled with dark red liquid. Roxy tried to pivot. The hand truck's left wheel, which had been wobbly since 2018, chose that exact moment to seize. The cart jerked violently. Roxy stumbled, her shoulder checking the waiter with the force of a linebacker. The tray went airborne. Time seemed to slow. Roxy watched, horrified, as 4 glasses of red wine arced through the air. They didn't hit the floor, they didn't hit the waiter, they hit him. Standing 5 feet away was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a darker, more dangerous era. He was towering, easily 6'5", with jet-black hair and shoulders that blocked out the chandelier light. He was wearing a masquerade costume, a pristine, white, high-collared tunic that looked hand-stitched. The wine splashed across his chest in a violent crimson wave. The music stopped. The chatter died. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, and absolute. Roxy dropped the hand truck. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." She frantically patted her pockets for a rag, finding only a grease-stained microfiber cloth. She lunged forward, dabbing frantically at the man's chest. "I have insurance. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I swear the wheel just—" A hand, large and warm, clamped around her wrist, stopping her mid-dab. Roxy looked up. And up. She found herself staring into eyes the color of dark espresso, framed by a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even moving. He was just staring. "You," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of her Doc Martens. "You have ruined the silk." "I know, I'm sorry," Roxy squeaked, trying to pull her hand back. He didn't let go. The man lowered his head. He brought her wrist closer to his face, but he didn't look at her hand. He looked at the stain on his chest. Then, with terrifying deliberation, he dipped his chin and dragged his tongue up the red streak on the fabric. Roxy stopped breathing. The entire room seemed to vanish. It was just her, this giant, and the wet, rasping sound of him tasting the wine off his own shirt. He pulled back, his eyes darkening, flashing with something gold and primal. "A 1982 Petrus," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "Mixed with vanilla and fear. An interesting blend." "Okay, buddy," Roxy said, her shock snapping into defensiveness. She yanked her hand free. "That was unhygienic and weird. Send me the bill. But don't look at me like I'm a T-bone steak." The man smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found a rabbit with a limp. "The bill," he repeated softly. "Oh, little vandal, you have no idea." Chapter 2. The Invoice. The brewery smelled like comfort, yeast, bubbling wort, and the sharp tang of sanitizer. Usually, this was Roxy's sanctuary. Today, it felt like a waiting room for an execution. Roxy paced the small office at the back of Bitter End Brewery, her boots thudding rhythmically against the concrete floor. Outside the frosted glass, the brewing tanks hummed, oblivious to her impending doom. "He licked the shirt, Meatball," she said to the Great Dane sprawled on the rug. "Who does that? Who tastes laundry?" Meatball let out a groan that sounded suspiciously like judgment. "You weren't there," she defended, pointing a calloused finger at the dog. "He was huge, and he had these eyes. It was like he was looking at my skeleton." Her laptop pinged. Roxy froze. She stared at the screen like it was a live grenade. A new email had appeared in her inbox. The subject line was simple. "Invoice. Reparation for Dellen Estate." "Okay," she breathed, cracking her knuckles. "It's just a shirt. How much can a shirt be? $500? Maybe 1,000 if it was designer?" She clicked the email. The PDF loaded slowly, prolonging the torture. Item: custom ceremonial tunic, hand-woven silk, bespoke tailoring, vintage wine replacement, Chateau Petrus 1982, 1 bottle. Cleaning fees, biohazard removal, estate atrium. Total due, $15,450. Roxy made a noise that sounded like a dying kettle. She blinked, hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves. They didn't. $15,000 for a shirt and a bottle of grape juice. "He's insane," she whispered. "He is actually legally insane." She opened a new tab and logged into her business bank account. The loading circles spun mockingly. Available balance, $412.38. She slumped into her chair, covering her face with her hands. The brewery was already hanging by a thread. The rent was due in 2 weeks, the hop prices had skyrocketed, and the pumpkin needed a new transmission. She didn't have $15,000. She barely had $15 for pizza. "I can't pay this," she told Meatball, who had rolled onto his back, exposing his spotted belly. "I'm going to jail, or worse, small claims court." She looked at the locket on her desk, the one with her grandmother's picture. "Don't let the bastards grind you down, Roxy," her gran used to say. "Right," Roxy said, sitting up straight. "Options. I need options." Option A, flee the country. The pumpkin wouldn't make it to the Canadian border. Option B, fake her own death. Too much paperwork. Option C, beg. She hated option C. It went against every cell in her fiercely independent body. She had built this brewery from the ground up, scrubbing floors and hauling grain sacks until her back screamed, just so she would never have to ask anyone for anything. But 15 grand wasn't a favor, it was a ransom. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over Celeste. "Hey, bestie," she rehearsed, her voice cracking. "Can I borrow the price of a compact car?" Meatball barked, a sharp, demanding sound. "You're right," Roxy sighed, grabbing her keys. "I have to try, but if I have to sell a kidney, I'm keeping the left one. It's my favorite." Chapter 3. The Indignity. Celeste's bakery, the muffin top, smelled like cinnamon and financial struggle. Roxy sat on a stool, watching her best friend frantically frost a tray of cupcakes. Celeste's blue hair was tied up in a chaotic bun, matching Roxy's energy perfectly. 15,000? Celeste shrieked, squeezing a piping bag so hard a flower exploded into a sugary blob. "Roxy, I have $200 and a sack of flour. I'm literally paying my rent in muffins this month." "I knew it," Roxy groaned, burying her head in her arms. "I just needed to hear it out loud." "Have you tried him?" Celeste asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Roxy stiffened. "No, absolutely not." "He has money, Rox, and he still texts you." "He texts me at 2 a.m. asking if I'm up," Roxy snapped. "Godfrey is a leech with a lease payment." "A leech with 15 grand, Celeste pointed out gently. Half an hour later, Roxy was sitting in a booth at a sleek, soulless bistro downtown. Across from her sat Godfrey Piven. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny and cologne that smelled like desperate ambition. His blonde hair was slicked back so tight it looked painful. "Roxanne," Godfrey smirked, leaning back as if he owned the place. "You look rustic. Still driving that orange monstrosity?" "It's a classic, Godfrey," Roxy said, clutching her coffee mug like a weapon. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. I need a loan. 15,000. I'll pay you back with interest. 10%. Godfrey laughed. It was a wet, condescending sound. 10%? Baby, the bank wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. But I'm not a bank. I'm a generous guy. He leaned forward, dropping his voice. His eyes raked over her flannel shirt. "I miss us, Rox. You were always so fiery. Tell you what, I write the check today, but I don't want 10%. Roxy's stomach churned. "What do you want?" "A week," Godfrey said, his smile widening. "You and me, my place, every night, just like old times. You remember how good I was to you?" The memory of him cheating on her with a spin instructor flashed through her mind. The memory of him borrowing money from her grandmother's fund and never paying it back followed. Roxy stood up slowly. She picked up her lukewarm coffee. "You want interest, Godfrey?" "I want a return on investment," he winked. Roxy threw the coffee in his face. It wasn't hot enough to burn, but it was wet enough to ruin his ego. Godfrey sputtered, wiping brown liquid from his eyes as the bistro went silent. "Here's your return," Roxy hissed, leaning down so her face was inches from his. "I'd rather rot in a cell than let you touch me again. Enjoy the stain. It matches your personality." She stormed out, adrenaline shaking her hands. She marched to the pumpkin, slammed the door shut, and gripped the steering wheel. "Okay," she breathed, starting the engine. "No money, no dignity left, just me and the Wolf King." She put the van in gear. She wasn't going to run. She was going to negotiate. And if Dominic Castellan wanted his money, he was going to have to take it in labor, because she was all out of cash. Chapter 4. The Negotiation. The drive back to the Castellan estate felt like a funeral procession for her pride. The iron gates swung open automatically as the pumpkin approached, almost as if the house was expecting her. Roxy parked next to the fountain, her dented van looking like an overgrown kumquat next to a row of sleek black SUVs. She marched to the front door and banged the heavy brass knocker. The door opened instantly. It wasn't a butler. It was him. Dominic Castellan wasn't wearing the tunic today. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, but he had discarded the tie. The top button of his shirt was undone, revealing a hint of tanned skin. He looked expensive, dangerous, and annoyingly calm. "You're early," he said, blocking the doorway with his massive frame. "I'm not here to pay," Roxy said, chin lifted. "I'm here to tell you that I don't have $15,000. I have $400 and a van that smells like yeast." Dominic leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The movement made his biceps strain against the fabric of his suit. He looked amused. And, Roxy continued, trying to ignore the way his espresso eyes were tracking her pulse in her neck. "I'm not a thief. I pay my debts. But I can't pay this one with money, so you have two choices. You can sue me, get nothing, and watch me file for bankruptcy, or we work something out." "Work something out," Dominic repeated. His voice dropped an octave. "Like what?" Roxy flushed, thinking of Godfrey's offer. "Not like that. Get your mind out of the gutter, Your Majesty. I mean labor. I saw your gardens. They're a mess. The hydrangeas are dying, and your soil pH is all wrong. And that beer you served at the gala, it tasted like cardboard soaked in regret." Dominic's eyebrows shot up. The scar above his left eye twitched. "You think you can improve my estate?" "I'm a brewer," Roxy said, stepping closer, poking a finger toward his chest, but stopping short of touching him. "And I know dirt. I'll work off the debt. 3 months. I'll fix your sad garden and I'll brew you beer that doesn't suck. In exchange, you wipe the slate clean." Dominic stared at her. He didn't blink. He was studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He took a step forward, invading her personal space. He smelled like rain, rich earth, and something spicy, like expensive whiskey. 3 months, he mused. Live in. "Excuse me?" "If you work for me, you live here," Dominic said, his tone brokering no argument. "The estate is remote. I don't want you commuting in that death trap of a vehicle." "The pumpkin is reliable," Roxy lied. 3 months, Dominic said, extending a large hand. "You brew, you garden, you stay out of the West Wing, and the debt is gone." Roxy looked at his hand. It was broad, calloused, not the hand of a man who just pushed paper. It was a deal with the devil, but it was better than Godfrey. She gripped his hand. His skin was scorching hot. "Deal," she said. "Good," Dominic said, and for a second, his eyes flashed that strange gold color again. "Pack your bags, Roxanne. You start tomorrow." Chapter 5. The Move-In. Moving day involved shoving her entire life into 3 duffel bags and coaxing Meatball into the van. By the time Roxy pulled up to the Castellan Estates service entrance, her nerves were frayed. "Okay, Meatball," she prepped the dog as she opened the passenger door. "Listen to me. This guy is rich and weird. He probably has guard dogs. You need to be brave. If anyone comes near me, you give them the Cujo face. Got it?" Meatball gave a low, rumbling growl, puffing out his massive chest. He looked terrifying, 150 pounds of muscle and teeth. "Good boy," Roxy said, clipping on his leash. They walked toward the main house. 2 security guards in dark suits stepped out from the shadows. They were huge, blocky men with earpieces. Meatball stiffened. A deep, guttural snarl ripped from his throat. He lunged against the leash, barking ferociously, hackles raised. The guards took a step back, hands drifting toward their belts. "Easy, Meatball," Roxy strained, digging her heels into the gravel. "He's friendly, mostly." Then the front door opened. Dominic stepped out. He was wearing a black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, a look that should have been casual but on him looked like tactical gear. He walked down the steps with a predatory grace. "Control your animal," Dominic said calmly. Meatball stopped barking instantly. Roxy watched, jaw-dropping, as her ferocious guardian looked at Dominic, whined a high-pitched, pathetic sound, and trotted over to him. The dog sat down at Dominic's feet and leaned his entire body weight against the alpha's legs, tail thumping rhythmically against the expensive gravel. Dominic looked down at the dog. His expression softened, just a fraction. He reached down and scratched Meatball behind the ears. "Traitor," Roxy whispered, betrayed. "You absolute turncoat." Dominic looked up, his hand still buried in Meatball's fur. "He has good instincts, better than his owner." "He usually hates men," Roxy argued, dropping her duffel bag. "He tried to eat the mailman last week. Why does he like you?" "I have a way with beasts," Dominic said enigmatically. He straightened up. "Benji will show you to the guest cottage. It's behind the greenhouse." A wiry man with glasses and a nervous energy scurried out from behind Dominic. This was Benji. He looked at Roxy, then at Dominic, then back at Roxy with wide, terrified eyes. "Right this way, Ms. Miller?" Benji squeaked. Roxy glared at Meatball, who was now drooling on Dominic's sneakers. "Come on, Judas, we have a cottage to inspect." Meatball reluctantly pulled away from Dominic and followed Roxy, but he kept looking back, casting longing glances at the tall man in the black t-shirt. As they walked away, Roxy felt that prickle on the back of her neck again. She knew, without turning around, that Dominic was watching her, tracking her. 3 months, she muttered to herself, gripping her keychain knuckle duster. Just 3 months. Don't look at his eyes, don't let the dog make friends, and definitely don't spill any more wine. Chapter 6. The Cottage. The guest cottage behind the greenhouse was nicer than any apartment Roxy had ever lived in. In fact, it was nicer than the house she grew up in. It had exposed timber beams, a fireplace that looked like it belonged in a ski lodge, and a kitchen island made of actual marble, not the peel-and-stick laminate she was used to. "Don't get comfortable," Roxy warned Meatball, as the Great Dane immediately claimed the plush leather sofa, circling 3 times before collapsing with a satisfied groan. "We are inmates here, buddy, indentured servants. As soon as that debt is paid, we are back to the van and the studio apartment that smells like stale beer." She dropped her duffel bag on the floor and looked around. The place was sterile, beautiful but devoid of life. On the kitchen counter, a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored cardstock waited. It was printed in elegant serif font. "Rules of the Castellan Estate. Curfew is strictly enforced. Guests are to remain indoors between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. The west wing of the main house is restricted. Do not enter under any circumstances. Do not approach the perimeter fence. The automated security systems are unforgiving. Dietary requests must be submitted to the kitchen staff by 8 a.m. High-protein options are recommended. If you hear howling, ignore it. We have extensive kennels for large breed security dogs." Roxy snorted, picking up the paper. "Ignore the howling? What is this, a gothic novel? Next he's going to tell me there's a mad wife in the attic." She tossed the list into the recycling bin. She was 26 years old, a business owner, and a tax-paying citizen. She didn't do curfews. She walked to the fridge to stock her meager supplies. She had brought the essentials: a 6-pack of her own IPA, a jar of spicy pickles, and a block of cheddar cheese for Meatball bribes. When she opened the fridge, however, it was already full. It was packed with steak. Rows and rows of raw, vacuum-sealed ribeyes, T-bones, and sirloins. There were also cartons of eggs and jugs of whole milk. No vegetables, no bread, just enough red meat to feed a tiger. "Okay," Roxy muttered, poking a package of ground bison. "So he's a carnivore. Rich people and their keto obsessions are getting out of hand." She grabbed a beer, popped the cap with her keychain knuckle duster, and took a long swig. She walked to the window. The sun was setting over the estate, casting long, jagged shadows across the manicured lawns. In the distance, the main house loomed, a massive structure of stone and glass. Somewhere in that fortress was Dominic Castellan, the man who licked wine off his shirt, the man who looked at her like she was a math problem he was trying to solve. 3 months, she whispered to the glass. I brew his beer, I fix his flowers, and I leave. Easy. Meatball let out a sharp bark from the couch, his ears perked up as he stared at the door. Relax, Cujo, Roxy said, scratching his ears. It's just the wind, or the large breed security dogs. We're fine. But as she stood there, a shiver traced its way down her spine. It wasn't the cold. It was the distinct, unshakable feeling that she had just walked willingly into a lion's den, and she had forgotten to bring a whip. Chapter 7. The First Brew. The main house kitchen was an industrial masterpiece. It was designed for catering massive events, gleaming with stainless steel and equipped with burners that looked like they could launch a rocket. Roxy felt oddly small standing in the center of it, clutching her bag of specialized hops. She was wearing her brewing uniform, oil-stained overalls over a white tank top, hair tied back with a rubber band she found in her pocket. Okay, she said to the empty room, let's make some magic. She had already set up her portable 10-gallon pilot system, which looked like a science fair project next to the estate's Viking ranges. She was starting a test batch of a red ale, something malty to balance out the pretentious atmosphere of the place. 2 hours later, the air was thick with the smell of boiling wort, a scent that was sweet, earthy, and distinctly cereal-like. Roxy was humming to herself, adding the bittering hops, when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She didn't hear him enter. He moved with a silence that was unnatural for a man of his size. 1 second she was alone, the next, Dominic was leaning against the stainless steel island, watching her. It smells like a bakery caught fire, he commented. Roxy jumped, nearly dropping her thermometer. She spun around, hand flying to her chest. Jesus, do you wear a bell? Put a bell on, seriously. Dominic didn't smile. He was dressed in a navy suit today, but the jacket was gone, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His forearms were thick, roped with veins, and covered in a dusting of dark hair. Roxy tried very hard not to stare at them. I am checking on my investment, Dominic said, walking closer. He peered into the boiling pot. Is it supposed to look like mud? It's wort, Roxy snapped, stepping between him and the kettle. And it's going to be a red ale. Deep, malty, with a caramel finish. Unless you prefer the dishwater you served at the gala? Dominic looked down at her. He was so close she could smell him over the boiling grain, rain, ozone, and that dark, spicy scent that made her knees feel weirdly weak. I prefer excellence, he said, his voice low. I don't drink beer often. It makes me sluggish. But I expect this to be worth the $15,000 you owe me. It will be, Roxy promised, crossing her arms. But you can't rush fermentation. Yeast has a schedule. You can't just glare at it and make it work faster. Dominic's lips twitched. You'd be surprised what I can make work with a glare. He reached out, his hand brushing past her shoulder to pick up a bag of Citra hops she had left on the counter. The contact was brief, electric. Roxy felt a jolt of static zap through her skin. She flinched. Dominic froze. He inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring. For a second, his eyes went unfocused, the dark espresso irises swirling with flecks of gold. He looked like he was high. Citrus, he murmured, but he wasn't looking at the hops. He was looking at her neck. And vanilla. It's my shampoo, Roxy said, her voice sounding breathless. She cleared her throat, stepping back to put distance between them. Look, unless you want to grab a paddle and aerate this, I need to focus. Brewing is chemistry. If I mess up the temperature, the yeast dies. Dominic stared at her for a long beat, his expression unreadable. Then he set the hops down. Carry on, Roxanne, he said. Do not disappoint me. He turned and walked out, his stride long and fluid. Roxy waited until he was gone before exhaling a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What is wrong with that man? She whispered to the boiling pot. And why does he smell so damn good? Chapter 8. The Night Wanderer. It was 2 a.m., and the no wandering rule was effectively taunting her. Roxy couldn't sleep. The guest cottage bed was too soft, like sleeping on a cloud made of marshmallows. She missed the lumpy mattress in her apartment. Plus, Meatball was snoring loudly enough to rattle the windows. She sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the tree line of the dense forest that bordered the estate. The moon was full, casting a silvery, ghostly light over the pines. Then she heard it. It started low, a mournful, rising keen that climbed into a long, vibrating howl. It wasn't a coyote. Coyotes yipped and screamed. This was deep, chest-rattling. It sounded like a wolf, but the size of a grizzly bear. If you hear howling, ignore it. Yeah, right, Roxy muttered. Curiosity was her fatal flaw. She stood up, slipped her feet into her unlaced boots, and crept toward the edge of the lawn. She reached the tree line. The howling had stopped, replaced by the heavy snap of twigs. Something was moving in the brush, something big. "Hello?" she whispered, immediately feeling like an idiot. "Here, doggy doggy?" A shadow detached itself from the darkness between two massive oaks. Roxy froze. It wasn't a dog. It was a silhouette that stood nearly 7 feet tall, broad as a refrigerator. It had hunched shoulders and glowing eyes, actual glowing yellow eyes that floated in the dark. Fear, cold and sharp, finally hit her. She stumbled back. Oh, hell no! Before she could turn and run, a hand clamped over her mouth. She screamed against the palm, thrashing. An arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing. She was spun around and pressed against a hard, hot chest. "Quiet," a voice hissed in her ear. Roxy stopped struggling. It was Dominic. He dragged her back toward the cottage, away from the trees, not stopping until they were under the safety of the porch light. He released her, stepping back. He looked wild. He was shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat. His chest was heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He was wearing only loose sweatpants, and his feet were bare and muddy. There was a smear of dirt on his cheek, and his hair was chaotic. "Are you insane?" he snarled, his voice rough, almost guttural. "The rules, Roxanne, they exist for a reason." Roxy was too busy staring at his abs, which looked like they were carved from marble, to be properly chastised. Then she remembered the monster in the woods. "There was something out there," she gasped, pointing at the trees. "It was huge. It had glowing eyes. You have a bear, or a Bigfoot." Dominic glanced at the woods, his jaw tightening. "It's a dog." "That was not a dog. It was the size of a minivan." "Tibetan Mastiffs," Dominic lied smoothly, though his eyes were still flashing with lingering adrenaline. "We breed them for size. They are nocturnal and territorial. If I hadn't found you, they would have torn you apart." Roxy looked at him skeptically. "You expect me to believe you have giant, glow-in-the-dark dogs roaming the woods?" "I expect you to believe that I am the landlord." Dominic stepped closer, looming over her. The heat radiating off him was intense, like a furnace door had been opened. "And if I say stay inside, you stay inside." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His hand was trembling slightly. "You have no survival instinct, do you?" "I have excellent survival instincts," Roxy retorted, though her voice wavered. "I survived my ex-boyfriend's cooking." Dominic let out a short, harsh laugh. "Go inside. Lock the door. If I catch you out here again at night, I will chain you to the radiator." He turned and jogged back toward the main house, disappearing into the shadows. Roxy watched him go, her mind racing. Tibetan Mastiffs, right. And she was the Queen of England. Chapter 9. The Garden. By day 5, Roxy had decided that physical labor was the only way to get the image of shirtless Dominic out of her head. She was in the East Garden, currently waging war against a rhododendron bush that had overgrown the stone path. The garden was a disaster of neglect, beautiful bones but covered in weeds. "Okay," she grunted, shoving her shovel into the earth. "You're coming out." She was trying to move a massive stone planter to get to the roots of a weed. The planter was carved from solid granite, about 3 feet wide, filled with soil and a dead tree. It easily weighed 300 pounds. Roxy shoved it. It didn't budge. She braced her shoulder against it and pushed with her legs. Nothing. "Need a forklift," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. "You're doing it wrong," a voice said. Roxy didn't even look up. "Unless you brought a crane, Dominic, your opinion is noted and discarded." Dominic walked into her peripheral vision. He was wearing a gray t-shirt that hugged his chest and dark jeans. He looked annoyingly fresh while she was covered in mulch. "It's about leverage," he said, "but mostly it's about not being weak." Roxy straightened up, planting her hands on her hips. "Excuse me? This thing weighs as much as a baby elephant. Nobody can move this alone." "Watch." Dominic walked up to the planter. He didn't brace himself. He didn't grunt. He simply bent his knees slightly, gripped the rim of the stone pot with one hand, and lifted it. He didn't drag it. He lifted it. 300 pounds of stone hovered in the air as he walked 5 feet to the left and set it down gently, without so much as disturbing the gravel. Roxy's mouth fell open. Her shovel fell out of her hand. "How?" she whispered. That's not physics." Dominic dusted his hands off. "Core strength and a proper diet." Roxy stared at his arms. They were big, sure, but that was superhuman. "What are you on? HGH? Steroids? Gamma radiation?" Dominic smirked. "Just good genetics, Roxanne." "That's not genetics," Roxy argued, walking over to the planter and trying to lift just one corner. She strained until her face turned red, but she barely got it an inch off the ground. "You're juicing. You have to be. Does the FDA know about you?" Dominic laughed, a real, rich sound that made the air feel lighter. "I assure you I am all natural. Now, since I moved your rock, you can finish weeding. I want this path clear by sunset." He started to walk away, then paused. "And Roxanne, drink some water. You're flushed." Roxy watched him leave, her brain trying to calculate the sheer force required to lift that stone. "Steroids," she decided firmly. "Definitely steroids. And probably some illegal experimental supplements from Russia. There is no other explanation." Chapter 10. The Dinner. At 7 p.m., Benji appeared at the cottage door with a terrified expression and a garment bag. "Mr. Castellan requests your presence for dinner," Benji squeaked. "He says attendance is mandatory, and he asked that you wear something that doesn't smell like fertilizer." Roxy looked at her mud-stained cargo pants. "Fair enough." 20 minutes later, she walked into the main dining room. The room was cavernous, lit by a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her entire brewery. The table was long enough to seat 20 people, but only 2 places were set, one at the head and one to the immediate right. Dominic stood as she entered. He was back in a suit, impeccable and imposing. "You clean up well?" he said. Roxy smoothed the skirt of the simple black dress she had dug out of the bottom of her bag. It was the dress she used for funerals and bank loan interviews. "I feel like I'm about to be interrogated." "Sit," Dominic commanded. Dinner was a study in contrasts. Roxy was served a plate of truffle pasta, rich, carb-heavy, and cooked. Dominic was served a steak. It was huge, thick, and so rare it was practically mooing. A pool of red juice gathered on the white porcelain plate. Roxy watched him cut a piece. He didn't saw at the meat, his knife slid through it like butter. He ate with a precision that was both elegant and vaguely terrifying. "So," Roxy said, swirling her wine, which she had checked carefully to ensure she hadn't spilled it. "Are we going to talk about the fact that you bench-pressed a boulder today, or are we pretending that's normal?" Dominic chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told you, I take care of my body." "Right, and the dogs in the woods, do they take supplements too?" Dominic set his fork down. The sound clinked sharply in the quiet room. "You ask a lot of questions, Roxanne. Most people in your position would simply enjoy the wine and the free rent." "I'm not most people," Roxy said, stabbing a ravioli. I like things to make sense, and nothing here makes sense. You live in a fortress, you eat enough red meat to give a cardiologist a heart attack, and you have the strength of a forklift. It's weird. Dominic leaned forward. The candlelight caught the gold flecks in his eyes. The atmosphere shifted. It became heavy, charged with that strange, static electricity. Perhaps I am weird, he said softly, or perhaps you have simply lived a very small, very safe life until now. He looked at her, really looked at her. His gaze wasn't just observing, it felt like a physical weight, heavier than a blanket, pressing against her skin. It was suffocating and thrilling all at once. It felt like a caress, tracing the line of her jaw, the pulse in her throat. Roxy stopped chewing. She couldn't look away. Her heart began to race, thudding a traitorous rhythm against her ribs. My life is fine, she managed to say, though her voice sounded thin. Is it? Dominic asked. You are lonely, Roxanne. I can smell it on you, like dust and old paper. Roxy stiffened. Okay, that's enough. I'm here to pay a debt, not get psychoanalyzed by a guy who eats raw cow. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Thank you for the pasta. I'll see you in the garden tomorrow. She turned and marched out, feeling his eyes burning into her back with every step. She didn't run, but she wanted to. Because for a terrifying second, when he looked at her like that, she didn't want to leave. She wanted to pull up a chair and let him devour her whole. Chapter 11. The Sabotage. The morning sun was trying its best to be cheerful, but Roxy's phone was vibrating with the specific, aggressive buzzing of a catastrophe. She was in the estate kitchen, measuring out grain for the second batch of red ale when she answered. Bitter End Brewery, this is Roxy. Rox, get down here, now! It was Celeste. Her voice wasn't the usual bubbly tone she used when announcing a new muffin flavor. It was flat, hard, and shaking. 20 minutes later, Roxy was standing in the shattered remains of her storefront. The pumpkin was idling at the curb, hazard lights blinking like panicked eyes. Oh no, Roxy whispered, stepping over the shards of the front window. It was carnage. The glass was gone. Inside, the taproom tables were overturned. But the real heartbreak was in the back. 2 of her fermentation tanks had been opened, the valves smashed. Gallons of unfinished IPA pooled on the concrete floor, sticky and smelling of wasted potential. Who did this? Roxy asked, her voice trembling, not with tears, but with a cold, white-hot rage. No cameras, Celeste said, kicking a piece of broken glass. But the neighbors saw a silver BMW speeding off around 3 a.m. Godfrey. Roxy squeezed her eyes shut. He was escalating. It wasn't enough to demean her. He had to destroy the one thing she had built with her own hands. She grabbed a broom, her knuckles white. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to turn him into compost. Let me help. A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Roxy spun around. Dominic Castellan was standing there. He filled the broken doorframe, looking absurdly out of place in his tailored suit amidst the wreckage of her dive bar. He surveyed the damage with eyes that were cold, calculating, and terrifyingly still. What are you doing here? Roxy snapped. I told you I had an emergency. I didn't ask for a chaperone. I don't like when my investments are threatened, Dominic said. He stepped inside, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the glass. He didn't look at the mess. He looked at the open valves. This was personal, sloppy, emotional. It was my ex, Roxy spat, aggressively sweeping glass into a pile. He drives a silver BMW and has the moral backbone of a jellyfish. Dominic pulled out his phone. He didn't dial, he just held it to his ear. Benji, send a crew to the bitter end. Glaziers, industrial cleaners, and a tank repair specialist. Have it finished by noon. No! Roxy stopped sweeping. I can't pay for that, Dominic. I'm already working off 15 grand. I am not adding luxury cleanup crew to my tab. Dominic hung up the phone and looked at her. His expression softened, just a fraction. Consider it a perk of employment. We protect our own. I'm not your own, Roxy argued, though the fight was draining out of her. I'm your gardener. You are under my roof, Dominic stated, the finality in his tone hitting her like a physical weight. And nobody touches what is under my roof. By noon, the brewery wasn't just fixed, it was upgraded. The glass was reinforced, the tanks were repaired, the mess was gone. It was efficient, expensive, and terrifying. Roxy sat on a bar stool, watching the crew pack up. She looked at Dominic, who was checking his emails in the corner. He wasn't just a rich guy, he was a force of nature. And for the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like his prisoner. She felt safe. And that terrified her more than the vandalism. Chapter 12. The Scent. The estate was quiet at night, a heavy, oppressive silence that magnified every sound. Roxy had spent the day scrubbing the lingering smell of vandalism off her skin, but she couldn't scrub away the anxiety. She walked down the long, carpeted hallway of the East Wing toward the library, hoping to find a book to distract her brain. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and yoga pants, her hair damp from the shower. She turned the corner and ran straight into a wall, except the wall was warm, solid, and wearing a black cashmere sweater. Dominic caught her by the shoulders to steady her. His grip was tight, too tight. He didn't let go immediately. Sorry, Roxy gasped, stepping back. I was just looking for a book. Dominic didn't answer. He was staring at the hollow of her throat. His nostrils flared, a sharp intake of breath that sounded painful. You smell like vanilla, he murmured. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. And rain. It's the body wash, Roxy said, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air around them felt suddenly thin, charged with static. Dominic? He took a step closer, backing her against the wainscoting. He wasn't looking at her face anymore. His eyes were tracing the pulse jumping in her neck. They were dark, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the iris until only a thin ring of espresso remained. It is overwhelming, he whispered. He leaned down, his face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a furnace trapped beneath skin. Roxy couldn't move. Logic told her to run, to push him away, to make a joke. But her body betrayed her. She tilted her head back, exposing her throat. Dominic groaned, a sound that vibrated deep in his chest. It sounded like a growl. He lowered his head, his nose brushing against her jawline. He inhaled deeply, shuddering against her. For a second, Roxy thought he was going to bite her, and God help her, she wanted him to. Then, he stiffened. He shoved himself away from her, slamming his back against the opposite wall. He breathed heavily, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he looked up, his eyes were flashing with a terrifying molten gold light. Go to your room, he snarled. Dominic, are you okay? Your eyes… Go! He roared. The sound wasn't human. It echoed off the walls, hitting her with a physical force that made her knees buckle. Lock the door, Roxanne, and do not come out until morning. Roxy didn't argue. She turned and ran back toward the cottage, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen the alpha of the West Coast pack sliding down the wall, head in his hands, fighting a war against his own biology. Chapter 13. The Vet Visit. The next morning, the tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Dominic acted as if the hallway incident hadn't happened, but he refused to make eye contact. Meatball needs his annual shots, Roxy announced over breakfast, breaking the silence. I'm taking him to the vet in town. No, Dominic said, stabbing a sausage link. You will take him to Dr. Tanaka. He handles all the estate's animals. Is he expensive? Roxy asked suspiciously. Because Meatball has no health insurance. I will cover it, Dominic said, standing up, and I am driving. The pumpkin can handle a dog. The pumpkin sounds like it has tuberculosis, Dominic countered. We are taking the SUV. An hour later, they were in a sleek, private clinic tucked away in the foothills. It didn't smell like a normal vet's office. wet dog and fear, it smelled like antiseptic and sage. Dr. Hideo Tanaka was a small, elderly man with kind eyes and hands steady as a surgeon's. He examined Meatball on a stainless steel table while Dominic stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the exits. "He is a fine specimen," Dr. Tanaka said, checking Meatball's teeth. "Strong heart, good muscle density. He has been eating well?" "Steak," Roxy muttered. "He eats better than I do." Dr. Tanaka chuckled. He prepared a syringe. "Now hold him steady. The alpha's companion animals often share their master's resilience, but needles are universally disliked." Roxy froze. "The what's companion?" Dr. Tanaka's hand paused. He glanced at Dominic. Dominic's face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened. "The alpha male," Dr. Tanaka corrected smoothly, though his smile became tight. "In wolf packs, the dominant male, the alpha, often has the healthiest kin." I was speaking metaphorically, of course. Dominic is the alpha of his estate, is he not? "Right," Roxy said slowly, narrowing her eyes. "Metaphorically." "Just give the dog the shot, Hideo," Dominic said, his voice clipped. Meatball didn't even flinch when the needle went in. He was too busy staring adoringly at Dominic. As they walked back to the car, Roxy stopped. "Is this some kind of weird rich guy cult? Alpha? Pack? You guys sound like you're LARPing." Dominic opened the car door for her. "Dr. Tanaka is old-fashioned. He uses antiquated terms. Get in the car, Roxanne." "You're weird," she decided, climbing in. "You're all weird, but at least the dog is healthy." Dominic shut the door. Through the window, Roxy saw him exhale a long breath, looking like a man who had just walked through a minefield and barely kept his legs. Chapter 14. The Storm. The storm rolled in off the Pacific like a freight train. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, accompanied by thunder that shook the foundations of the main house. Roxy was in the library again. She was avoiding the cottage because the wind made the trees scrape against the roof like skeletal fingers. She was cataloging gardening books for Dominic, busy work he had invented to keep her close. A crack of thunder split the sky directly overhead. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The library was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the strobe light flashes of lightning through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Meatball, who had been sleeping by the fire, let out a high-pitched yelp and scrambled under a heavy oak desk. "It's okay, buddy," Roxy whispered, crouching down. "It's just noise." "He hates the thunder," a voice said from the shadows. Roxy jumped. Dominic was sitting in a wingback chair by the window. In the lightning flashes, he looked like a Gothic statue, still, silent, and monochromatic. "He's a coward," Roxy said, her voice shaking slightly. She hated storms too, though she'd never admit it. "For a giant dog, he's pathetic." "Fear is a survival mechanism," Dominic said. He stood up. Another flash of lightning illuminated his face. He looked tired. The scar on his brow stood out in stark relief. He walked over to where she was crouching. "Are you afraid, Roxanne?" "No," she lied. Boom. The house shuddered. Roxy flinched, instinctively reaching out. Her hand found his arm. Dominic didn't pull away this time. He covered her hand with his own. His skin was hot, grounding. He pulled her up from the floor. They stood in the dark, the rain lashing against the glass. "Your heart is beating fast," Dominic murmured. He stepped closer. "I can hear it." "You have super hearing now?" Roxy tried to joke, but it came out as a whisper. "I hear everything when it comes to you," he admitted. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her lower lip. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocatingly intimate. The scent of rain and ozone, his scent, wrapped around her. Roxy leaned into his touch. She knew she shouldn't. He was her boss. He was her creditor. He was possibly insane. But he was also the only solid thing in a world that felt like it was spinning apart. Dominic lowered his head. His breath ghosted against her lips. "Roxanne." He was going to kiss her. She knew it. She wanted it. She parted her lips. Crack! A massive branch from an ancient oak outside snapped and crashed onto the terrace, shattering the moment like glass. Dominic pulled back instantly, his head snapping toward the window. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the alertness of a predator. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice devoid of the warmth from seconds ago. "I need to check the perimeter." He vanished into the dark hallway, leaving Roxy standing alone in the library, her lips tingling and her heart breaking just a little bit. Chapter 15. The Jealousy. The sun came out the next day as if to apologize for the violence of the night before. Roxy was in the driveway, loading bags of mulch into a wheelbarrow, when a red convertible roared through the gates. It was a Porsche, of course. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was stunning, tall, athletic, with hair like spun gold and legs that went on for days. She wore designer sunglasses and an air of absolute confidence. "Dom!" the woman called out. Dominic emerged from the front door. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that Roxy had never seen directed at her. "Jessica," he said. The woman ran up the steps and hugged him. It wasn't a polite, social hug. It was a full-body embrace, familiar and comfortable. Dominic hugged her back, his hand resting on her back in a way that screamed intimacy. Roxy felt a sharp, twisting pain in her gut. It felt like swallowing a bag of nails. She gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow. Who is she? Jessica pulled back, laughing, and punched Dominic playfully on the arm. She sniffed the air, then looked directly at Roxy. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, assessed Roxy with terrifying speed. "So this is the gardener?" Jessica asked, walking down the steps. She didn't look malicious. She looked curious. "This is Roxanne," Dominic said, following her. He looked tense again. "Hi," Roxy said, wiping her dirty hands on her overalls. "I'm the brewer, and the gardener, and apparently the entertainment." Jessica laughed. "Feisty, I like her. I'm Jessica. I'm an old friend of Dominic's. We grew up together." "Family friend," Dominic corrected quickly. Too quickly. "Right," Jessica winked. She reached out and patted Dominic's chest. "We go way back. Pack bonds run deep, right, Dom?" Roxy froze. Pack. That word again. "Dr. Tanaka said that too," Roxy said, narrowing her eyes. "Is this a club? Do you guys have jackets?" Jessica's eyes widened slightly. Dominic stepped between them. "Jessica is here to help with the summit preparations. She'll be staying in the East Wing." "Great," Roxy said, picking up the wheelbarrow. "More mouths to feed. I hope you like rare steak, Jessica, because that's apparently the only food group allowed on this compound." She turned and shoved the wheelbarrow toward the garden, the wheels squeaking aggressively. She shouldn't care. She really shouldn't. Dominic wasn't hers. He was a billionaire with a supermodel friend who spoke his weird code language. But as she rounded the corner, she looked back. She saw Jessica lean in and whisper something in Dominic's ear. Dominic looked pained. Roxy slammed the wheelbarrow down, kicking a bag of mulch. "I hate him," she lied to a hydrangea bush. "I hate him, and I hate his stupid perfect friend, and I hate his stupid expensive shirt." She didn't hate him. She was jealous. And the realization hit her harder than the debt. She was falling for the Wolf King, and she was pretty sure she was going to get eaten alive. Chapter 16. The Intruder. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Roxy was ostensibly pruning rose bushes near the perimeter fence, but in reality, she was watching Dominic and Jessica. They were standing on the terrace, heads bent together over a set of blueprints. Jessica laughed at something Dominic said, touching his arm. Roxy snipped a rose head off with a little too much force. "Walnut," she muttered to the flower. "Absolute walnut." Suddenly, Dominic went rigid. It wasn't a gradual stiffening, it was instantaneous. His head snapped up, turning toward the dense forest that bordered the north side of the estate. The playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a terrifying, lethal stillness. Jessica stopped laughing. She looked at Dominic, then at the woods, her expression shifting from socialite to soldier in a heartbeat. "Dom," she warned, her voice low. "I know," Dominic replied. He vaulted over the terrace railing, a drop of 10 feet, and landed silently on the grass. He didn't look at Roxy. He didn't look at Jessica. He just started running toward the tree line. "Dominic!" Roxy dropped her shears. "Where are you going?" "Stay inside," he roared back, not breaking his stride. "Get into the house, Roxanne! Now!" He disappeared into the shadows of the pines. Jessica was already moving, ushering Roxy toward the back door with surprising strength. "Let's go, honey," Jessica said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "When the boss says inside, we go inside." "What is out there?" Roxy demanded, digging her heels in. "Is it the dogs again?" "Something like that," Jessica said grimly, shoving Roxy into the kitchen and locking the heavy deadbolt. For the next hour, the estate was silent. Too silent. Roxy paced the kitchen, Meatball trailing her anxiously. Jessica sat at the island, scrolling through her phone, but her leg was bouncing nervously. Then the back door handle turned. Roxy grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. The door opened. Dominic stood there. Roxy gasped, the skillet clattering to the floor. He looked like he had gone through a wood chipper. His shirt was shredded, hanging in ribbons from his torso. Deep, sluggishly bleeding claw marks raked across his chest and left shoulder. There was dirt in his hair and blood, too much blood, splattered across his hands. "Oh my God," Roxy whispered, rushing forward. "Dominic, you need an ambulance." "No ambulance," Dominic grunted, stumbling slightly. He leaned against the counter, breathing heavily. His skin was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "First aid kit, in the pantry." "First aid? You look like you fought a bear," Roxy yelled, her hands hovering over him, terrified to touch the wounds. "It was a bobcat," Dominic rasped. He hissed as he peeled a strip of ruined shirt away from a gash. Territorial, nasty temper. "A bobcat did that?" Roxy stared at the wounds. They were parallel slashes, deep and wide. "That wasn't a cat, Dominic. That was a velociraptor." "Just get the kit, Roxanne," he snapped, his eyes flashing that dangerous gold color. Roxy scrambled to the pantry, grabbing the industrial-sized medical box. When she returned, Jessica was already wetting a cloth. "I can do it," Roxy said, pushing past the blonde woman. Jealousy flared even amidst the panic. This was her employer, her weird roommate. She dabbed the cloth against his chest. Dominic flinched, his muscles contracting under her fingers. His skin was scorching hot, radiating feverish heat. "You're burning up," she murmured, cleaning the blood away. "High metabolism," Dominic gritted out, watching her face. "It speeds up the reaction to trauma." Roxy looked up, locking eyes with him. He looked exhausted, brutalized, and terrifyingly raw. "You are the worst liar I have ever met." "And you," Dominic whispered, leaning into her touch as she bandaged his shoulder. "Talk too much." Chapter 17. The Flu. 2 days later, the adrenaline crash hit Roxy, followed immediately by a truckload of germs. It started with a tickle in her throat while she was filtering the red ale. By noon, her head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. By 4 p.m., she was shivering violently despite the summer heat. "I'm fine," she told Meatball, who was looking at her with concern. "Just a little dusty in here." She tried to lift a keg. Her vision swam, the room tilting sideways. The floor rushed up to meet her. She didn't hit the concrete. Strong arms caught her before she could make impact. "You are not fine," a deep voice rumbled against her ear. Roxy blinked. Dominic was holding her. He looked fully healed, which was impossible given the ribbons his chest had been in 48 hours ago, but she was too delirious to question the medical miracle. "Put me down," she mumbled, her words slurring. "I have to dry hop the IPA." "You are going to bed," Dominic ordered. He lifted her easily, carrying her bridal style out of the brewery and across the lawn to the cottage. The next 12 hours were a fever-hazed blur. Roxy drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time she woke up, he was there. She saw him placing a cold cloth on her forehead. She felt him lifting her head to make her drink water. He wasn't the imperious alpha king. He was gentle, moving with a quiet reverence that confused her fever-addled brain. "Why are you here?" she whispered around 3 a.m. The room was dark, lit only by the embers in the fireplace. Dominic was sitting in the chair next to her bed, watching her with an intensity that felt heavy. "I cannot leave," he admitted softly. "My instincts, they will not allow it." "You have weird instincts," Roxy murmured, closing her eyes. "Like a mother hen, a giant, scary mother hen." She felt his hand brush the hair off her damp forehead. His fingers were cool, soothing against her burning skin. "Sleep, Roxanne," he whispered. "You smell good," she sighed, burrowing into the pillow. "Like the woods." Dominic went still. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a vibration that she felt in her bones rather than heard. "Rest, mate." Roxy's eyes snapped open for a fraction of a second. Mate? Like best buddies? Australians? But before she could ask, the fever dragged her back down into the dark, leaving the word echoing in her dreams. Chapter 18. The Brewer's Prize. The fever broke the next morning, leaving Roxy feeling weak but clear-headed. She spent the day recovering, eating the soup that had mysteriously appeared in her kitchen, made by the estate chef, delivered by Benji. By the following afternoon, she was back in the brewery. The red ale was finished. It was time for the verdict. Dominic entered the brewery at exactly 5 p.m. He looked immaculate in a navy suit, no sign of the bobcat attack visible. "You should be resting," he said, eyeing her pale complexion. "I'm fine," Roxy said, wiping her hands on a towel. "And the beer is ready, unless you want to dock my pay for sick days." Dominic ignored the jab. He walked to the tap she had set up. Roxy poured a glass. The liquid was a deep, rich amber, topped with a creamy head of foam. She slid the glass across the stainless steel counter. "The vintage Vandal red ale! Malty, notes of caramel and roasted nut with a clean finish. Try it." Dominic picked up the glass. He inspected the color against the light. Then he took a sip. He paused. He took another sip, slower this time. Roxy held her breath. This was it. Her craft, her pride. Dominic set the glass down. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his eyes. There was genuine, unadulterated respect. "It is exceptional," he said, far superior to the swill the caterers provided. Roxy let out a breath, a grin spreading across her face. "Told you, I know what I'm doing." "You do," Dominic agreed. "You are chaotic, disrespectful, and reckless, but you are a master of your craft." "High praise from the king," Roxy teased. Dominic walked around the counter. He stopped in front of her. The air shifted again, that familiar tension crackling between them. "I value competence, Roxanne," he said quietly, "and passion. You have both in abundance." He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of flour from her cheek. It was an intimate, possessive gesture. Roxy's heart stuttered. "Does this mean I get a raise?" she squeaked. Dominic smirked, his hand dropping away. "It means I might not fire you for the mother hen comment." He turned and walked toward the door. "Bring a keg to the main house tonight. I want Benji to try it." Roxy watched him go, touching her cheek where his thumb had been. She was in so much trouble. Chapter 19. The Slip-Up. Benji was a nervous drinker. He held his pint of red ale like it was a live grenade. They were in the main estate kitchen. Dominic was in his office taking a call, leaving Roxy to babysit the neurotic assistant while he sampled the brew. "It's good, right?" Roxy asked, leaning against the counter. "Oh, yes, very good. Excellent," Benji stammered, taking a tiny sip. Mr. Castellan was very impressed, which is rare. He usually hates human things. Roxy frowned. "Human things? What is he like? Alien things?" Benji paled. "No, I meant Mundane things, common things. He has very refined tastes, ancient tastes. Right, Roxy said slowly. Because he's a vampire? Benji choked on his beer. He coughed violently, slamming the glass down. No, God, no. Vampires are, they don't. He's not dead. He's very alive. Too alive sometimes. Roxy stared at him. Benji, take a breath. You look like you're going to pass out. I'm just stressed, Benji wheezed, wiping his mouth. The summit is coming up. All the alphas, the CEOs will be here. It's a lot of testosterone in one room. Dominic's inner wolf is already on edge, and if the negotiations go south... He stopped. The room went dead silent. Roxy tilted her head. His inner what? Benji's eyes bulged behind his glasses. He looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor tiles. Wolf of Wall Street. Spirit. His inner corporate shark, metaphorically. You said inner wolf, Roxy said flatly. First, Dr. Tanaka talks about alphas and packs. Now you're talking about inner wolves. Is this a furry convention? Is that the secret? I have to go, Benji squeaked. He grabbed his briefcase and bolted toward the door. He nearly collided with Dominic, who was walking in. Dominic caught Benji by the scruff of his neck to steady him. He looked from his terrifyingly pale assistant to Roxy's suspicious face. What happened? Dominic asked, his voice low and dangerous. Benji was just telling me about your inner wolf, Roxy said, crossing her arms, and the upcoming alpha meeting. Dominic went still. He looked at Benji. It wasn't a glare, it was a promise of future pain. Benji, Dominic said softly, go check the perimeter. Take the long route. Benji whimpered and fled. Dominic turned to Roxy. He uses colorful metaphors. He uses specific metaphors, Roxy countered. You guys are terrible at keeping secrets. Whatever weird cult this is, you need a better PR team. Dominic sighed, running a hand through his hair. It is not a cult, Roxanne. It is complicated family business. Uh-huh, Roxy said. Well, keep your inner wolf away from my kegs. I don't want him shedding in the beer. Chapter 20. The Gala Prep. The summit was officially here. The estate had transformed overnight. Black SUVs lined the driveway. Men in dark suits patrolled the grounds. The air tasted like ozone and aggression. Roxy had been ordered to set up a serving station in the main ballroom. She was told to be invisible, efficient, and to dress appropriately. She stood in front of the mirror in the guest cottage, staring at herself. She had ditched the overalls. In their place was a dress she had bought years ago for a friend's wedding and never worn since. It was a deep emerald green, matching the estate's forest, with a sweetheart neckline and a skirt that flared just above the knee. It wasn't designer, but it hugged her curves in all the right places. She had tamed her wild curls into a sleek bun and applied actual mascara. I look like a spy, she told Meatball. A spy who serves beer. Meatball woofed approval from the rug. Roxy grabbed her apron, she refused to serve without it, and headed to the main house. The ballroom was already filling up. The guests were intense. The men were all huge, broad-shouldered, and radiated an energy that made the hair on Roxy's arms stand up. The women were equally striking, prowling rather than walking. Roxy sat up behind the bar, checking her taps. She tied the apron around her waist, softening the look of the dress, but not hiding it. Roxanne. She looked up. Dominic was walking toward her. He froze. He was wearing a tuxedo, classic, black, perfectly tailored. But he wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her. He stopped 5 feet away, his eyes sweeping over her from her heels to her exposed collarbone. His expression went blank, stripped of all social pleasantries. His pupils dilated so rapidly his eyes turned almost black. You, he started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. You are not wearing flannel. Roxy felt a blush heat her cheeks. It's a special occasion. I tried to clean up so I wouldn't embarrass the brand. Dominic stepped closer. He didn't seem to notice the room full of dangerous dignitaries watching him. He only saw her. "You look." He struggled for the word. His hand twitched at his side as if he wanted to reach out. "Dangerous." "Dangerous?" Roxy laughed nervously. "It's just polyester, Dominic." "It is green," he murmured, "like the forest." "Castellan!" a booming voice called out. Dominic blinked, snapping out of his trance. A massive man with a gray beard was approaching. Dominic's mask slammed back into place, the cold, aloof alpha. "Stay here," Dominic ordered Roxy, his voice tight. "Do not wander. Do not talk to anyone unless you are pouring them a drink. And for God's sake, do not let anyone touch you." He turned to greet the guest, but Roxy saw his hand clench into a fist behind his back. He was rattled. And knowing that the unflappable Wolf King was rattled by her in a $20 dress, that was the best feeling she'd had all week. Chapter 21. The Warning. The summit was in full swing inside the ballroom, a cocktail of expensive cologne, tension, and power plays, when Benji tapped Roxy on the shoulder. "Problem at the main gate," he whispered, looking greener than usual. "Security says a man is demanding to see you. He's intoxicated and driving a silver BMW. Roxy's stomach dropped. "Godfrey." "I'll handle it," she said, untying her apron. "I'm going to murder him with a tire iron." "I will accompany you," a voice rumbled. Dominic was suddenly there. He hadn't been standing near the bar a second ago, yet here he was. His face was a mask of cold fury. "I don't need a bodyguard," Roxy hissed as they walked briskly toward the front entrance. "I need a shovel to bury the body." "Stay behind me," was all Dominic said. They reached the massive iron gates. Godfrey's silver BMW was parked haphazardly across the entrance, engine idling. Godfrey was leaning against the grill, swaying. He held a bottle of cheap whiskey in one hand. "Roxanne!" he shouted, seeing her approach. "There she is, living the high life with the freaks." Roxy marched forward, but Dominic's arms shot out, barring her path like a steel beam. "Go home, Godfrey," Roxy yelled over Dominic's arm. "You're drunk, and you owe me for a window." Godfrey laughed, a wet, sloppy sound. He stumbled forward, ignoring the security guards who had their hands on their holsters. "I don't owe you anything," Godfrey sneered, pointing the bottle at her. "You think you're special because you're sleeping with the landlord? He's just using you, Rox. Look at him. He's a monster. Everyone in town knows the Castellans are—" "Enough," Dominic said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice carried across the gravel like a crack of thunder. Godfrey stopped. He squinted at Dominic. "Make me, rich boy." He lunged toward Roxy, reaching for her arm. "Come on, Rox, let's go." Dominic moved. It wasn't a human movement, it was a blur. 1 second he was standing still, the next he was between Roxy and Godfrey. He didn't touch the smaller man. He simply leaned down, baring his teeth, and a sound tore from his chest. "Grrr! Roar!" It wasn't a shout, it wasn't a yell. It was a subsonic vibration that rattled Roxy's teeth. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting, or a lion claiming a kill. It was deep, guttural, and undeniably terrifyingly animalistic. Godfrey turned white. He dropped the whiskey bottle. It shattered on the asphalt. "What the hell?" Godfrey whimpered, backing away. He looked at Dominic's eyes, which were glowing a vivid, molten gold in the darkness, and pure, primal terror flooded his face. "Leave," Dominic commanded. His voice was layered, like two voices speaking at once. "If you return, you will not leave again." Godfrey didn't argue. He scrambled into his car, nearly tripping over his own feet. He threw the BMW into reverse, tires screeching, and sped off into the night as if the gates of hell had opened up behind him. Roxy stood frozen in the driveway. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Dominic's back. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders rising and falling with jagged breaths. "Dominic," she whispered, "that wasn't human." Chapter 22. The Denial. Dominic turned around slowly. The gold in his eyes was fading, retreating back into the dark espresso brown, but the pupils were still blown wide. He looked wrecked, like a man holding back a tidal wave with his bare hands. "He was drunk," Dominic said, his voice rough. "Fear makes people hear things." "Don't lie to me." Roxy stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "I felt that growl in my bones, Dominic. My dog growls. Bears growl. Venture capitalists in tuxedos do not growl like they're about to eat someone." "I have a condition," Dominic said, looking away. "Vocal cord anomaly." "Oh, come on!" Roxy threw her hands up. "First it's the strength, then the healing. Now you have a vocal cord anomaly that sounds like a prehistoric predator? Who are you? What are you?" Dominic's expression hardened. The vulnerability she had seen in the library, the tenderness during her flu, it all vanished behind a wall of ice. "I am your employer," he stated coldly. "And you are the staff. That is all you need to know." Roxy felt the words like a slap. She recoiled, hurt flashing across her face before she could mask it with anger. "Right," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The staff. Just the help you hired to fix your mess." "Roxanne, I didn't mean—" Dominic started, stepping forward, his hand twitching. "No, you were clear," Roxy cut him off. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling cold despite the summer air. "Go back to your party, Mr. Castellan. Go impress your scary friends. I'll just go clean up the glass your vocal anomaly caused." She turned on her heel and marched back toward the service entrance. Dominic watched her go. He didn't follow. He stood alone in the driveway, the smell of her hurt, sharp and acidic like lemon juice, clogging his senses. "It is for your own good," he whispered to the empty air, but even to his own ears it sounded like a lie. Chapter 23. The Summit Begins. The next day, the estate felt less like a home and more like a war zone. The businessmen had arrived in force. These weren't normal executives. They were massive, silent men who moved in packs. They didn't smile. They sniffed the air when they walked into rooms. The tension in the main house was suffocating, a heavy blanket of aggression that made Roxy's skin crawl. Dominic was nowhere to be seen. He was locked in the conference room in the West Wing, negotiating whatever treaties these people negotiated. At 4 p.m., Benji found Roxy in the brewery. He looked like he was about to hyperventilate. "Mr. Castellan has issued a directive," Benji squeaked, handing her a key card. "A directive?" Roxy wiped her hands. "Does he want more beer?" "No, he wants you in the cottage," Benji said. "He says the negotiations are entering a sensitive phase. You are to lock the door. You are not to leave. You are not to open the door for anyone except him or me." Roxy stared at the key card. "He's grounding me? I'm 26. "Please, Roxy," Benji begged, checking his watch. "The alpha from the Northern Territory is volatile. If he smells, if he sees you, it could complicate things. Just stay inside tonight, for your own safety." Something in Benji's eyes, genuine, unmasked fear, stopped her from arguing. "Fine," Roxy sighed. "I'll go to my room, but tell your boss that this prison warden act is getting old." She grabbed a sandwich from the kitchen and marched to the cottage. She locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and collapsed on the couch next to Meatball. "Well, buddy," she told the dog, "it's just you and me, and a list of rules I really want to break." Outside, the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the lawn. The estate fell silent, but it was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Chapter 24. The Disobedience. By 8 p.m., Roxy was climbing the walls. She had watched 3 episodes of a reality show, eaten all her spicy jerky, and paced a hole in the rug. "I can't do this," she groaned. "I'm not a damsel. I don't do sit and wait." She thought about the beer. The main kegs for the evening event were stored in the detached wine cellar, a climate-controlled building about 50 yards from the main house. She had adjusted the pressure regulator yesterday, but with the storm 2 nights ago, The atmospheric changes could have messed with the carbonation. "The reserve kegs for the after-party are sitting in the detached cellar," she reasoned. "If the pressure regulator drifted during the storm, that beer is going to be foam soup. And technically, the wine cellar isn't the main house or the west wing. It's a workspace." She looked at Meatball. The Great Dane was awake, his ears perked up, staring at the door. "You coming?" she asked. Meatball stood up immediately, his tail wagging. He grabbed his favorite squeaky toy, a rubber chicken, in his mouth. "Leave the chicken, take the teeth," Roxy said, opening the door. The night air was cool. The estate was eerily quiet. The windows of the main house were dark, save for the conference room on the second floor. Roxy kept to the shadows, moving quickly across the lawn. Meatball trotted beside her, surprisingly silent for a dog the size of a pony. They reached the wine cellar. It was an old stone building, partially underground. Roxy punched in the code. The heavy door hissed open. "Okay," she whispered. "Quick check, in and out. Dominic never has to know." She stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of oak and fermentation. She walked down the stone steps, Meatball close at her heels. As the door clicked shut behind them, Roxy felt a sudden chill. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was a feeling, a prickle on the back of her neck. Meatball stopped. The rubber chicken dropped from his mouth. A low, vibrating growl started deep in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Roxy whispered, freezing. Meatball wasn't looking at the beer kegs. He was looking into the shadows at the far end of the cellar where the vintage wines were stored. From the darkness, a laugh echoed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It sounded wet and hungry. "Well, well," a scratchy voice hissed. "The king's pet has wandered off her leash." Chapter 25. The Trap. Roxy's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a step back, her hand fumbling for the brewery keychain in her pocket, the one with the knuckle duster. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is private property. Security is on the way." "Security is busy," another voice answered from her left. 3 figures emerged from the shadows between the wine racks. They were men, but they looked wrong. They were dirty, dressed in tattered clothes that smelled of old blood and musk. Their movements were twitchy, jerky, like addicts going through withdrawal. But it was their eyes that froze Roxy's blood. They were glowing, not the noble gold of Dominic's eyes, but a sickly, muddy yellow. "We smelled you," the first man said. He was gaunt, his teeth looking too sharp for his mouth. "Vanilla and alpha scent. You smell like him." "Leave her alone," Meatball roared. Wait, no, Meatball didn't speak. He barked. A deafening, thunderous bark that shook the wine bottles in their racks. He stepped in front of Roxy, his hackles raised, teeth bared. He didn't look like a coward now. He looked like 150 pounds of lethal devotion. "Cute dog," the second man sneered. He cracked his neck. A sickening pop echoed in the room. His jaw unhinged, elongating, his nose flattened, fur sprouted rapidly along his cheeks. Roxy watched in horror. It wasn't a costume, it wasn't a trick. The man's face was rearranging itself, bones snapping and reshaping into a snout. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Werewolves!" The realization hit her like a punch. The strength, the diet, the howling, the pack. "Get the girl," the leader snarled, dropping to all fours as his hands turned into claws. "Kill the dog. We'll leave her head on the Alpha's doorstep." "Run, Roxy!" her brains screamed. But there was nowhere to run. The 3 rogues, creatures that were halfway between man and wolf, grotesque and terrifying, fanned out, blocking the stairs. Meatball didn't back down. He snarled, snapping at the air, holding the line. Roxy grabbed a heavy glass bottle of 1982 Petrus from the rack beside her. "You want a piece of me?" she yelled, her voice cracking but fierce. "Come and get it, you ugly mutts!" The leader lunged. Meatball met him in midair. Chaos erupted. Chapter 26. The Attack. The air in the wine cellar tasted of ancient dust and fresh terror. Roxy gripped the bottle of 1982 Petrus by the neck, her knuckles white. It was a $5,000 bottle of wine, and she was about to smash it over someone's head. "Good dog," the rogue leader sneered, his voice distorted by the elongating bones of his jaw. "Fresh meat." He lunged. Meatball didn't hesitate. The Great Dane, who usually hid under the bed during thunderstorms and required a nightlight to sleep, launched himself into the air. He collided with the rogue in a tangle of fur and snapping teeth. "Run!" Roxy screamed, swinging the bottle at the second rogue who was creeping toward her. The glass connected with the side of the creature's head. It didn't shatter. The bottle was thick, heavy glass. The impact made a sickening thud, and the rogue staggered back, snarling. "You little," he hissed, wiping blood from his temple. His eyes were fully yellow now, his fingers lengthening into curved, dirty claws. Roxy backed up until her hips hit the oak barrel behind her. She fumbled in her pocket for the keychain knuckle duster, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Stay back!" she yelled, holding the bottle like a club. I have pepper spray, and I'm not afraid to use it." She didn't have pepper spray. She had a bottle of fermented grapes and a lot of regret. To her left, the fight was brutal. Meatball was fighting with a ferocity she didn't know he possessed, but he was a dog fighting a monster. The rogue leader, now half-shifted with matted gray fur sprouting from his spine, grabbed Meatball by the scruff of his neck. With a roar, the creature lifted the 150-pound dog and threw him. Meatball sailed through the air and slammed into the stone wall with a bone-jarring crack. He hit the floor and didn't get up. A high, pained whine escaped him, then silence. "No!" Roxy screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "Meatball!" She forgot about the other two monsters. She forgot about self-preservation. She raised the wine bottle and charged at the leader, blind with rage. "I'm going to kill you!" she shrieked. The third rogue, who had been circling the perimeter, caught her. A hand, rough, hairy, and impossibly strong, clamped around her throat, lifting her off her feet. Roxy kicked wildly, her boots connecting with nothing but air. The bottle slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, the expensive red wine pooling like blood. "Feisty," the creature holding her laughed, his breath smelling of rot. He squeezed. Black spots danced in Roxy's vision. "The Alpha is going to be so mad when we send him your pieces." Roxy clawed at the hand choking her, her vision tunneling. She couldn't breathe. She could only hear the wheezing of her own lungs and the silence where Meatball should have been barking. Then, the cellar door didn't just open, it imploded. There was a sound like a bomb going off, metal tearing, wood splintering, and the heavy steel security door was ripped off its hinges and thrown across the room. The rogue holding her froze. Standing in the doorway, framed by the moonlight, was a shadow. It was Dominic. But it wasn't the man she knew. He was vibrating with a rage so potent it felt like a physical shockwave. His eyes were glowing molten gold, burning with the intensity of a dying star. And he growled. Chapter 27. The Monster. Dominic didn't speak. He didn't issue a warning. He simply ceased to be human. He moved with a speed that defied physics, a blur of violence that the eye couldn't track. He crossed the 30 feet between the door and the rogues in a heartbeat. The rogue holding Roxy dropped her. He didn't have a choice. Dominic had seized him by the throat and the belt, lifting him effortlessly into the air. With a roar that shook the foundation of the cellar, Dominic slammed the creature onto the concrete floor. The sound was wet and crunching, the sound of a spine snapping. The rogue went limp instantly. Roxy scrambled backward, gasping for air, her hands clutching her bruised throat. She watched, paralyzed by horror, as Dominic turned on the other two. He was partially shifted. His canines had lengthened into razor-sharp fangs. His fingernails were gone, replaced by thick black talons that looked like obsidian knives. The buttons of his tuxedo shirt had popped from the expansion of his chest, revealing muscles that rippled and shifted under the skin like living things. The rogue leader, the one who had hurt Meatball, tried to run. Dominic caught him by the back of his tattered shirt. He jerked the creature back, spinning him around. The rogue slashed at Dominic's face, claws raking across his cheek. Dominic didn't even flinch. He grabbed the rogue's arm and twisted. There was a sickening snap of bone, followed by a howl of agony. "You touched what is mine." Dominic's voice was a distortion, a cacophony of man and wolf layered together. He didn't fight with technique. He fought with brutality. He tore into them, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. It was visceral. It was messy. Blood sprayed across the wine racks, mixing with the spilled Petrus. He was obliterating them, dismantling them piece by piece with a cold, terrifying efficiency. The third rogue tried to flank him. Dominic backhanded him without looking, a blow so powerful it sent the creature flying into a stack of oak barrels. The barrels collapsed, burying the rogue under hundreds of pounds of wood and steel. It was over in seconds. 3 monsters lay dead or dying on the floor. Dominic stood in the center of the carnage. He was panting, his chest heaving. His hands were coated in blood up to the wrists. Blood dripped from his chin. The cellar fell silent, save for the dripping of wine and the ragged sound of Dominic's breathing. Roxy sat pressed against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She stared at Dominic. He slowly turned to face her. His eyes were still glowing, wild and unseeing. He looked like a nightmare. He looked like death incarnate. He took a step toward her, then stopped. He seemed to realize what he looked like. He lowered his head, his hands curling into fists, waiting for her to scream, waiting for her to look at him with the same revulsion she had shown the rogues. Chapter 28. The Aftermath. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of copper, expensive wine, and the musk of wild animals. On the floor, the bodies of the rogues began to change. The fur receded, the elongated snouts shortened, the claws retracted. Within moments, the monstrous creatures were gone, replaced by the broken bodies of 3 human men. It was grotesque. It made the violence feel real, stripped of its supernatural buffer. These were men, and Dominic had slaughtered them. Dominic stood like a statue, refusing to wipe the blood from his face. He wouldn't hide it. He let her see the monster in its entirety. He watched her through lowered lashes, his gold eyes dimming to a dark, pained brown. "Run," his posture seemed to say. "Run away, little human. This is what lies beneath the suits and the money." Roxy pushed herself up from the floor. Her legs were trembling, but she forced them to work. She used the wine rack to steady herself. She took a step toward him. Dominic flinched. He actually took a step back as if her proximity burned him. "Roxanne," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "Don't." Roxy ignored him. She didn't look at his claws, which were slowly receding back into human fingernails. She didn't look at the dead men on the floor. She walked right past him. She brushed against his blood-soaked arm, not caring that it stained her green dress. She fell to her knees beside the pile of broken barrels against the far wall. "Meatball," she choked out. The Great Dane was lying on his side. He wasn't moving. A trickle of blood ran from his nose, pooling on the stone. Roxy's hands hovered over him, terrified to touch him, terrified that she would find him cold. "Meatball, please," she sobbed, the tears finally spilling over. "Please be okay. You can't leave me. You're all I have." She laid her head on the dog's flank. There was a faint, shallow rise and fall. He was breathing, barely. "He's alive!" she cried out, turning her head to look at Dominic. Dominic was still standing where she had left him, looking stunned that she hadn't fled the room screaming murderer. "Dominic!" Roxy yelled, her voice fierce and demanding. "He's alive! Stop standing there brooding and help me! You're the only one strong enough to carry him!" Dominic blinked. The alpha mask cracked. The monster receded, leaving behind a man who looked bewildered by her priorities. "You," he started. "You want my help?" "Yes, you idiot!" Roxy wiped her eyes, leaving a smear of blood on her cheek. "Pick him up! We have to get him to the vet!" Dominic moved then. He crossed the room, kneeling beside her. He didn't look at the dog. He looked at her face, searching for fear. He found panic, grief, and anger, but not fear of him. "He has internal bleeding," Dominic said, his voice regaining its command. "And a broken rib. We must move him carefully." "Just save him," Roxy whispered, grabbing Dominic's bloody hand with her own. "Please." Chapter 29. The Acceptance. Dominic slid his arms under the massive dog, lifting him as if he were made of feathers. Meatball let out a low, pained whimper but didn't wake. "To the SUV," Dominic ordered. "I will drive." They ran up the stairs, leaving the carnage of the cellar behind. The night air hit Roxy like a slap, cold and clean after the metallic stench of the underground. They reached the black Aston Martin. Dominic didn't bother opening the trunk. He laid Meatball gently across the back seat's pristine leather upholstery, staining it with blood and dirt. Roxy scrambled into the back seat, pulling Meatball's heavy head into her lap. Dominic vaulted into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and the car tore down the driveway, gravel spraying like bullets. "Dr. Tanaka is at the clinic in town," Dominic said, his eyes glued to the road. He was driving fast, dangerously fast, but with absolute precision. Roxy stroked Meatball's ears, her tears falling onto his fur. "Hang on, buddy. We're almost there. You're such a good boy." She looked up. In the rearview mirror, Dominic's eyes were watching her. He looked haunted. "You saw them," he said quietly. "You saw what I did." "I saw," Roxy said, her voice steady. "And?" "And you saved us," she said. Dominic gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "I killed them, Roxanne. I tore them apart. I am not a hero. I am a butcher." Roxy looked at the blood drying on his hands. She thought about the way the rogue had choked her. She thought about Meatball flying through the air. "You're a wolf," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Dominic flinched. "Yes." "And they were wolves too?" "Rogues," he corrected. "Feral. Mad." "Okay," Roxy said. She looked back down at her dog. "Well, you're the wolf who pays my salary and likes my beer. And right now, you're the wolf driving us to the hospital. So shut up and drive." Silence filled the car. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the cellar. It was a stunned silence. Dominic looked at her in the mirror again, confusion warring with something softer, something dangerous. "You are irrational," he murmured. "I'm in shock," Roxy shot back. "Ask me again when I haven't just been strangled by a guy who turned into a poodle." A ghost of a smile touched Dominic's lips. "They were not poodles." "Whatever, just drive." Roxy leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. She reached out with one hand, blindly finding the back of the driver's seat. She rested her hand there, near his shoulder. She felt the tension drain out of him, inch by inch. He wasn't alone. For the first time in a century of loneliness, the monster was in the car, covered in blood, and the girl hadn't opened the door to jump out. Chapter 30. The Truth. The clinic was closed, but Dr. Tanaka was waiting at the door when they skidded into the parking lot. Dominic must have called ahead using the car's hands-free system while Roxy was crying over the dog. "Bring him to Trauma Room 1, Tanaka ordered, not even blinking at Dominic's blood-soaked tuxedo. The next hour was agony. Roxy sat in the waiting room, staring at a poster about heartworm prevention. She was still wearing her emerald green dress, now ruined with blood and dirt. She looked like a prom queen who had survived a horror movie. Dominic stood by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot. He had washed his hands and face in the bathroom, but his shirt was still a ruin. Finally, Dr. Tanaka emerged. "He is stable," the vet said softly. "A broken rib, a concussion, and some bruising. But he is a strong dog. He will recover." Roxy let out a sob of relief, slumping back in her chair. "Can I see him?" "He needs rest. The sedative is strong," Tanaka said. "Come back in the morning. I will stay with him tonight." Dr. Tanaka looked at Dominic, gave a small, knowing nod, and retreated into the back. Dominic turned to Roxy. "Come, I will take you home." "I want to stay," Roxy argued. You need to sleep, and we need to talk. The drive back to the estate was somber. When they pulled up to the main house, Dominic didn't unlock the doors immediately. He killed the engine and turned to face her. You know what I am, he said. I do, Roxy said. Werewolves, packs, alphas. It's all real. It is a secret we have kept for centuries, Dominic said. Humans are not meant to know. It puts you in danger. Tonight was proof of that. I can handle myself, Roxy said stubbornly. No, you cannot. Dominic's voice rose, cracking with emotion. You almost died, Roxanne. If I had been a second later, if I hadn't heard the dog… He looked away, his jaw working. The rogues came because of the summit. They came because of me. My world is violent, it is bloody, and it destroys everything soft that touches it. I'm not soft, Roxy bristled. You are human, Dominic said gently. You are fragile, you break. He reached into the center console and pulled out a thick envelope. He held it out to her. What is this? Roxy asked, not taking it. Your debt is paid, Dominic said, in full, plus a bonus for the brewing and the trauma. There is enough in there to start a new life, somewhere far away from Seattle, somewhere safe. Roxy stared at the envelope. You're firing me? I am freeing you, Dominic corrected. He looked at her with eyes that were full of heartbreak. Pack your things. Take the van. When the dog is well, Dr. Tanaka will transport him to you. Leave tonight, Roxanne. Roxy looked at the envelope, then at his face. She saw the pain there. He wasn't sending her away because he didn't want her. He was sending her away because he wanted her too much. She took the envelope. Dominic closed his eyes, a look of utter defeat on his face. Roxy slowly tore the envelope in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces of paper fall onto the leather console between them. No, she said. Dominic's eyes snapped open. Roxanne. I don't run, she said, her voice fierce. I told you that on day one. I don't run from debts and I don't run from fights. And I certainly don't run just because my boss has a fur problem. She leaned forward, grabbing his ruined lapels and pulling him closer. You don't get to decide what's too dangerous for me, Dominic. I decide, and I'm deciding that I'm not done yelling at you yet. Dominic stared at her, stunned, as the scent of her determination filled the small space of the car. He had expected fear. He had expected greed. He had not expected this. You are making a mistake, he whispered, but his hand came up to cover hers on his chest. Probably, Roxy said, but it's my mistake to make. Chapter 31. The Stand. The silence in the SUV was thick enough to choke on. The torn pieces of the envelope lay on the center console like white confetti, a stark contrast to the dark, blood-stained leather. Dominic stared at the paper scraps, then slowly lifted his gaze to Roxy. His expression was a fractured mosaic of relief and terror. You are stubborn, he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. You are infuriatingly stubborn. It's part of my charm, Roxy said, though her hands were trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and aching. Now unlock the doors. I need a shower and you need a drink. Dominic hesitated for a heartbeat longer, searching her face for any sign of deception. Finding none, he unlocked the doors. They walked into the main house in silence. The grand foyer, usually so intimidating with its marble floors and vaulted ceilings, felt different tonight. It felt quiet, safe. Go to the master suite, Dominic said, gesturing toward the grand staircase. The water pressure is better. I will use the guest bath. No, Roxy said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. She turned to face him. He looked wrecked, his tuxedo shirt shredded, dried blood on his jaw, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his secret. We go together, she stated. I'm not letting you brood in the guest room while I use your fancy soap. Dominic stiffened. Roxanne, my control is frayed. The scent of blood, the violence. I need distance to recalibrate. I don't want distance. Roxy stepped closer, invading his personal space. She reached out and took his hand. His knuckles were bruised, the skin hot. "I saw the monster, Dominic. I saw him tear 3 werewolves apart to save my dog. And honestly, I prefer him to the venture capitalist." Dominic let out a shuddering breath. "You are irrational. You should be running." "I told you," Roxy said softly, intertwining her fingers with his. "Meatball likes you, and that dog is a judge of character. He knew what you were from day one, a protector. If he trusts you, I trust you." She tugged on his hand. "Now come upstairs. I can't unzip this dress by myself." Dominic stared at her, his dark eyes swirling with that molten gold light. He looked at her like she was a miracle he didn't believe in but desperately wanted to keep. "As you wish," he murmured, the resignation in his voice sounding suspiciously like surrender. He followed her up the stairs, his shadow swallowing hers, no longer the predator stalking prey, but a guardian following his queen. Chapter 32. The Union. The master bathroom was larger than Roxy's entire apartment. It was a sanctuary of black marble and gold fixtures centered around a massive soaking tub. Roxy stood before the vanity, her hands shaking as she tried to reach the zipper of her ruined emerald dress. It was stuck, matted with dried blood and dirt. "Allow me." Dominic's voice came from directly behind her. He didn't touch her skin. His large hands deftly found the zipper. With a gentle, precise movement, a stark contrast to the violence of the cellar, he lowered it. The cool air hit her skin, followed immediately by the heat of his body standing inches away. Roxy let the dress pool at her feet. She stepped out of it, clad only in her undergarments, and turned to face him. Dominic had discarded his ruined jacket and shirt. His chest was a landscape of muscle and fading scars, broad and imposing. He looked at her with a hunger that stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't just lust, it was reverence. It was the look of a starving man finally seeing a feast. "You are beautiful," he rasped, his voice vibrating in the tiled room. "And you are mine." "I'm yours," Roxy whispered, the admission unlocking something deep in her chest. Dominic reached out, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "My mate," he growled, the word heavy with ancient meaning. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a collision. He claimed her mouth with a fierce, intoxicating passion that made her knees buckle. He tasted of power and rain and something wild. Roxy wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring herself against his strength. He lifted her effortlessly, setting her on the edge of the vanity counter. His hands were everywhere, worshipping, demanding, possessing. He treated her as if she were made of glass, yet held her with a strength that promised she would never fall. "I tried to protect you," he murmured against her throat, his lips trailing fire down her skin. "I tried to keep you away." "You failed," Roxy gasped, threading her fingers through his dark hair. "Thank God," Dominic breathed. The rest of the night was a blur of steam and skin and whispered promises. In the safety of his arms, the horror of the cellar faded, replaced by the overwhelming reality of the bond. He was the storm, and she was the anchor. He was the wolf, and she was the one person who wasn't afraid to run with him. When they finally slept, wrapped in each other in the massive bed, Dominic held her against his chest, his chin resting on her head. He didn't sleep. He just listened to her heartbeat, the only sound that mattered in his world. Chapter 33. The New Normal. 2 weeks later, the Castellan estate was operating under a new, slightly chaotic management style. Roxy sat in Dominic's massive leather chair in the main office, her boots propped up on the mahogany desk. A stack of invoices sat on her left, a plate of half-eaten spicy jerky sat on her right. "Sign here," she said, sliding a document across the desk without looking up. Benji, looking significantly less terrified than usual, signed the paper. "The shipment of hops for the Pack Pale Ale is scheduled for Tuesday." "Good," Roxy said, finally looking up. "And make sure they use the loading dock, not the front door. I don't want another Petrus incident." "Never again," Benji shuddered. The door opened and Dominic walked in. He was wearing a t-shirt that stretched tight across his chest and jeans, a casual look that Roxy had insisted on. He carried a steaming mug of coffee. "Your caffeine," he said, placing the mug near her hand. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "How is the Empire?" "The Empire is thirsty," Roxy said, taking a sip. "And expensive. Do you know how much your security team spends on protein bars?" "They require fuel," Dominic said, resting his hip against the desk. He looked relaxed, the perpetual tension that used to line his face completely gone. "Did you speak to Dr. Tanaka?" "Yeah," Roxy smiled, the expression softening her face. "Meatball is coming home tomorrow. He's grumpy about the cone of shame, but he's eating again." "Good," Dominic said. "The house is too quiet without him." It was a strange new reality. The pack members treated Roxy with a mix of confusion and absolute deference. She wasn't just the human brewer anymore, she was the mate of the Alpha King. She was the Luna, even if she refused to let anyone call her that. She threatened to spray Benji with a hose if he used the title. "I'm going through the old expenses," Roxy said, gesturing to a box of files on the floor. "Tax season is coming up and your filing system is archaic. MISC expenses is not a valid category, Dominic." "I have people for that," Dominic dismissed, running a hand down her arm. "Your people are afraid of you," Roxy countered. "I'm not. I'm going to balance this budget if it kills me." Dominic chuckled, a low, warm sound. "You are relentless." "I'm efficient," she corrected. "Now go be an alpha. I have receipts to hunt." Dominic kissed her again, lingering for a moment before heading to the door. "I will be in the garden. The hydrangeas need attention." Roxy watched him go, feeling a swell of warmth in her chest. She turned back to the box of receipts. She was going to organize this life, one piece of paper at a time. Chapter 34. The Twist. It was 4 p.m. when Roxy found the smoking gun. She was deep in the digital archives of Dominic's personal email, looking for a receipt for a tractor repair from last week. She was scrolling through a folder labeled Purchases 2026, humming a tune to herself. Her eyes caught a subject line, Order confirmation, number 88429, Party City Online. Roxy paused. Party City? Dominic Castellan, who wore Italian silk and drank wine older than her car, shopped at Party City? Curiosity piqued, she clicked the email. The digital receipt opened. Item, medieval cosplay tunic, the Royal Edition. Material, 100% polyester blend. Size, XXL. Price, $19.99. Roxy froze. She blinked. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. The date on the receipt was 2 days before the gala. The picture attached was the exact white tunic Dominic had been wearing the night she spilled the wine. The bespoke, hand-woven silk tunic. The priceless heirloom. $19, Roxy whispered. $19. A slow, dangerous grin spread across her face. She printed the receipt. She grabbed the paper and marched out of the office, her boots thudding against the hardwood with purpose. She found Dominic in the East Garden. He was pruning a rose bush, looking peaceful and annoyingly handsome. "Dominic!" Roxy barked. He turned, smiling. "Yes, my love?" Roxy held up the piece of paper like a judge holding a death sentence. "What is this?" Dominic squinted at the paper. His smile faltered. His eyes darted to the left, a clear sign of guilt. "It appears to be a receipt," he said carefully. "For a polyester costume shirt," Roxy clarified, stepping into the flower bed. "Price, $19.99. Shipping, free." Dominic cleared his throat. He set down his shears. "Roxanne, I can explain." "You charged me $15,000, Roxy yelled, waving the paper. "You made me an indentured servant. You terrified me. You made me think I ruined a piece of history. Even with the wine, that's nowhere near 15 grand. It was polyester, Dominic. It was flammable plastic." Dominic paused. He looked at her, his expression shifting from guilty to sheepish. A boyish grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. I liked the way you smelled. Roxy stopped. What? At the gala, Dominic admitted, stepping closer. When you crashed into me, you smelled like vanilla and chaos. My wolf went insane. I knew you were my mate instantly. He shrugged, looking incredibly unapologetic. I knew you were proud. You wouldn't take charity. You wouldn't have dinner with me if I just asked. So, I improvised. You improvised a $15,000 debt? Roxy gaped at him. It worked, Dominic pointed out. You moved in, you brewed excellent beer, and now you run my estate. Roxy stared at him. She looked at the receipt. Then she looked back at him. She crumbled the paper into a ball and threw it at his chest. It bounced harmlessly off his pectoral muscle. You represent everything wrong with capitalism, she declared. I love you, Dominic said simply. Roxy sighed, fighting a smile and losing. I hate you so much. I know, he said, pulling her into his arms. What can I do to make it up to you? Roxy looked at the driveway where the battered, rusty pumpkin was parked. I want a new van, she said firmly. A Mercedes Sprinter with heated seats and a custom wrap for the brewery. Dominic laughed, hugging her tight. Done. I'll order it today. And you're doing the dishes for a month, she added. Let's not get crazy, Dominic whispered, kissing her before she could argue. Chapter 35. Epilogue. 6 months later. The sun was setting over the Castellan estate, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. Roxy sat on the front porch swing, a cold glass of Pack Pale Ale in her hand. Parked in the driveway was a gleaming, brand-new Mercedes Sprinter van, jet black with the Bitter End Brewery logo painted in gold on the side. At her feet, Meatball was snoring. The Great Dane had fully recovered, though he had milked the injury for months to get extra treats. He was now slightly overweight and slept on a memory foam orthopedic bed that cost more than Roxy's old car. The screen door creaked open. Dominic stepped out. He was barefoot, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said, Brewer's Assistant, a gag gift Roxy had bought him. Dinner is almost ready, he said, sitting down next to her on the swing. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his warmth. Steak. Again. I'm shocked, Roxy said dryly, resting her head on his shoulder. She looked out over the estate. The gardens were blooming, the brewery was expanding, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't lonely. She had a family, a weird, furry, high-maintenance family, but hers. You know, Roxy said, watching Meatball twitch in his sleep. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be married to a werewolf king and running a supernatural estate, I would have asked what they were smoking. Life is unpredictable, Dominic murmured, kissing her temple. Are you happy, Roxanne? Roxy looked at the van. She looked at the fat dog. She looked at the man who had torn the world apart to save her. Yeah, she smiled, clinking her glass against his imaginary one. I'm happy, but you still owe me for the dry cleaning on that green dress. Dominic groaned, leaning his head back against the swing. Put it on my tab. Oh, I will, Roxy promised. I definitely will. The end.